Hey YouTube, Warbles Onlot here with a mad scientist video that's pretty much a mea culpa. Those of you who watched yesterday's upload will no doubt recognise this Trafalgar size 2 cold safe with patent dates 11, 15 and 18 and a watermark showing Queen Victoria's head on the sheet of galvanised steel or galvanised iron, which forms the bottom of the water tank. The deteriorated remains of a paper sticker on the front of the water tank and 2 water taps on each face of the tank, as well as an oral history to the effect that this thing's supposed to have come into town in a flat pack and it belonged to the grandfather of Neville Fakes, and Neville Fakes' grandparents came out from England and they arrived in town in a bullock wagon in 1840. And like a trusting little hillbilly, I gave full credence to the oral history that came with the safe, and it never occurred to me to question the idea that it was an 1835 vintage Trafalgar cold safe. I knew the Trafalgar was different to the Coolgardie, and I'd heard that the Coolgardie had been invented on the goldfields in Western Australia, and I assumed that it was a copy of the Trafalgar. Well, I got a pretty good comment response from the video I uploaded yesterday, and one of the comments,
make your own and get a hold of an original. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.
One of the comments on yesterday's video, which the eagle-eyed will see I have amended the title of, comment from Thorn Warbler, gave me a link to Collections Museums Victoria. And would you look at that? What we see is a Trafalgar cold safe, more or less identical to the one that I've got, lacking the ant trap ceramic pot legs, which this one has on all 4 corners. It's also lacking the drain spigot. Voila. And while it's got the sticker on the tank, it shows there's clearly only 1 tap on each side. So maybe the whole thing is smaller. It's got Hessian name branded screens. Maybe what's illustrated here is a Trafalgar number 1, and it only has 1 tap on each face of the tank. So anyway, let's have a read of the text. Food storage, Coolgardie safe cooling chest. Invention of the Coolgardie safe is credited to Arthur Patrick McCormick, a contractor in Coolgardie and later Mayor of Narrogin. Coolgardie is in the eastern goldfields region of Western Australia. Gold was first discovered there in 1892. The town site became a municipality in 1894. By 1898, its population of 15,000 made it the 3rd largest town in Western Australia after Perth and Fremantle. In the last decade of the 19th century, Coolgardie was the capital of the Western Australian goldfields. Being 180 kilometres from the nearest civilization, food supplies were initially scarce and expensive. As fresh food was a valuable commodity, there was incentive to preserve it and keep it out of reach of scavengers. It was in an effort to do this that McCormick came up with his design for the Coolgardie safe. McCormick noticed that a wet bag placed over a bottle cooled its contents. He further noted that if this bottle was placed in a draft, the bag would dry out more quickly, but the bottle would get colder. What McCormick had discovered was the principle of evaporation. To change any liquid into a gaseous state requires energy. This energy is taken in the form of heat from its surroundings. Ingpen, 1982, page 18. Employing this principle, McCormick made a box for his provisions, which he covered with a wet Hessian bag. He then placed a tray on top, into which he poured water twice daily. He hung strips of flannel from the tray so the water would drip down onto the Hessian bag, keeping it damp. The success of McCormick's invention would not have worked without a steady supply of water, and then it goes on to talk about how they got water on the goldfields and meat safes and food safes. So anyway, there we have it. 1898 is kind of your earliest possible date for somebody manufacturing a evaporative cold safe. And this is the 1948 Carpenter's variety, which uses the bottom collecting tray effectively as the ant trap, and the funnel goes into the hole in the floorboards, and the spigot is not actually touching the funnel, so ants can climb up the funnel but they can't get into the spigot, and if they climb into the bottom water tray then they drown. This one uses asbestos sheeting for trays and for a cover on top of the top water tray, and it has fabric wicks, and you can build them out of wood, but I reckon if I was building one of these today I would pop rivet it out of aluminium sheet and aluminium tube, and I would go for modern plastic fly screens, but I'd stick with hemp for the evaporator screens. And instead of fabric wicks, I reckon you could replace the function of these adjustable taps with polypipe drip irrigation regulation taps and seal the whole thing with modern marine silastic. So I'm guessing the patents referred to here probably talk about the idea of the taps, the fly-proof screens, and maybe even the idea of having a collecting bucket with separate ant traps underneath it. But 3 patents filed over 7 years, and there's room for the slice of humble pie, which making and posting this and deleting yesterday's video represents. But fact of the matter is I'm just not prepared to leave a video up there with quite as much bullshit, garbage in, garbage out bullshit, but bullshit nonetheless in it, as yesterday's upload. So anyway, with the wisdom of 2020 hindsight, my guess is that when Neville Fakes, who was in his 80s when he was telling my mother the story of the cold safe and how it used to be at Bardwell, and how Bardwell was halfway between his parents' main farm and town, and when he was a kid he used to ride a bicycle to town to go to school, and it was so cold in winter they'd fill the handlebars of his bicycle with boiling water with a cork in each end, and by the time he got to Bardwell his handlebars had cooled down, so he'd go in there, and the people who lived at Bardwell would, I don't know whether they were employees or family, but they'd refill his handlebars with boiling water for him to go the rest of the way to town. And later years, when he was a bigger schoolboy or when it was summer or something, one of his jobs was to adjust the water tank and drip flow on the cold safe at Bardwell, or maybe it was in the dairy at his own place, but before going to school and on coming home from school, that was part of his chores, was adjusting this drip safe. And consider that to be one encapsulated story. A different encapsulated story will be that the drip safe came to town as a flat pack and had to be assembled once it arrived in Glen Innes. A different encapsulated story will be that his grandparents came to Australia on a sailing ship in 1840 and came to Glen Innes on a bullock wagon, and either in his mind or in my mother's understanding when he's related the story to her, she's got the idea that the drip safe, which came to town as a flat pack, came on the bullock wagon in 1840, and then she's believed it for the last 15 years or so since she first heard the rave, put it together in her head, and then she's fed it to me and I've swallowed it whole as bolus, and then redigested it and thrown it out there yesterday to YouTube. So yeah, mea culpa, mea culpa. I'm a wicked, evil believer of oral history. I'm terribly sorry. So anyway, you'll have to forgive me for never asking Neville Fakes last time I talked to him anything at all about the drip safe, because I was too enthusiastically talking to him about propellers. because I've actually flown behind two propellers which I've designed and carved. One of them I crashed. And see that fragment of wood there? Strangely shaped fragment of wood in the propeller display of my toilet. This is a piece of phenolic resin impregnated Australian hardwood which was being used at Sydney University in the late 1930s by the first class to go through there studying mechanical engineering. And Neville Fakes was in that class. He'd been into aeroplanes ever since Sir Charles Kingsford Smith landed Southern Cross in his paddock on the Fakes farm down there by the Beardy Flat. And he'd done a fair bit of bicycling between the Southern Cross and my grandfather's blacksmith shop to get the parts made to repair the Southern Cross. And Neville Fakes actually went for a joyride in the Southern Cross. Big thing. That was 1928. So yeah, 1936, he was in the first class to start aeronautical engineering at Sydney Uni. And he studied under Sir Lawrence Wackett, a fellow who designed the Wirraway, and they were working on propellers for the Wirraway. And he brought this thing back home and he gave it to a friend of his, and I finished up with this as, something that was given to me because I was into propellers, and Neville Fakes was the town's expert on propellers. He had a fairly illustrious history, actually. He went to Japan with Australia's occupying forces as an Air Force officer. He administered some part of Japan for years after the war, and when he left, they named him a living national cultural treasure. And he administered, I think it was Lord Howe Island, until he retired. So yeah, I was picking his brains about propellers and throwing him, performance figures that I'd come up with for my own designs. Well, let's face it, how often does an aeronautical engineer in his 80s who studied under Wackett in the late 1930s designing propellers for the Wirraway, how often does he come across some young fella who's actually designed and carved and flown behind a propeller of his own manufacture? So I'm afraid not only did I never actually personally quiz Neville Fakes about the ancestry and pedigree of the Trafalgar cold safe, I was sort of predisposed to accept the idea that because Neville Fakes was supposed to have said a thing, therefore it was going to be true. So there you go. Now you know that's the full complete humble pie video regarding the cold safe. There's a bonus extra feature, 22 degrees on the screens, 18.5 degrees inside, 41.8 degrees overhead, 29.4 ambient air temperature here, which agrees with the maximum minimum thermometer under the tree, in the shade, in the ventilated insulated hut. Temperature of the forest floor, 51.4 in the sun, 44.8, 29.4 in the shade, 66.6 degrees on the clearing in the sun, 29.1 air temperature in the hut, 32 degrees at roof level, 23.9 on the outside of the old Coolgardie cold safe, 23.2 inside, and in the old vegetable crisper, the potatoes, 22 degrees. And inside this, which with a 1918 patent date, can't possibly be any more than about 98 or maybe 95 years old, 18.1 degrees. All achieved on about 5 litres or a gallon of water per day. Although I find that about 4 times a day you put 3 gallons of water from the bottom tank to the top tank. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.